What is up, plant people? It is Tuesday, August the 11th, 2020, and this is Vikram Baliga back with you again for another wonderful and exciting episode of the Planthropology Podcast, the show where we dive into the lives, careers, and passions of some really cool, really awesome, really smart plant people. How have you been? Are you doing okay? I just want to say, before we jump into this, thank you so much for listening to my little tribute to my grandfather last week. It wasn't much. I didn't say everything I wanted to, but it means the world to me that you joined in with me for just a little bit to remember his life and the cool guy that he was. Doing something new today. This is our first deep dive episode. So I mentioned a couple weeks ago that I'm going to start bringing some guests back every couple of months, every now and then, to really drill into some of the stuff that they do and talk more subject matter and find out some of the stuff that they study. And I wanted to start off with my friend Hallie from the One to Grow On podcast. Hallie and everyone at One to Grow On has been just such good friends over the past few months as I've been getting into this podcast journey, and I am very grateful for them, and I really love these people a lot. And so Hallie works in food and in food distribution and supply chain and everything else. And something that I'm really passionate about is food systems and local food and food production and everything that goes into that. So with all the issues we've had over the past few months with COVID, I thought it would be a great first deep dive to talk about local, regional, and national food systems and see if we can maybe discuss some of the problems with it and some of the ways that we might be able to fix it. So that's what I did. Asked Hallie to come back. We recorded this a couple months ago, and y'all just buckle up. I think you are really going to love this episode. It's so good and so much information and some serious topics. It's maybe not as goofy and lighthearted as some of them all the way through. There are some funny parts, I think, but it's stuff that you need to know, and it's stuff that you need to understand about where your food comes from and how it gets onto your plate. Real quick, before we do that, I just want to mention again our two partners, Pecan Ridge, a local pecan company with all kinds of other great local products. Whether you live in the Lubbock area or not, Pecan Ridge has something for you. Go to pecanridge.com, use the promo code PLANTPeople at checkout, and get 10% off your order. Also, don't forget about local LBK at locallbk.com. If you are in this area and either shop in Lubbock or live in Lubbock or do anything in Lubbock, USA, you should be a member of Local LBK. You can get discounts at all kinds of businesses, from restaurants to clothing stores and everything in between, all over town. It is a great way to advocate for our community and a great way to plug in. So that's locallbk.com, and there will be links for both of these things in the show notes. But y'all, that's really all I have to say. Follow us on social media, Planthropology, all the places. Leave me a review. I really appreciate reading your ratings and reviews, and it really helps me out to know that I'm doing a good deal, and it kind of keeps us up in the charts. So drop me a rating, give me a follow, connect on social media, join the Planthropology's I'm not even going to edit that out, because this is how I talk these days, apparently. Join the Planthropology's Cool Plant People Facebook group, and it's a lot of fun, and it's something you should be a part of for sure. So without any more rambling, we're just going to jump into today's episode. So grab a sandwich, think about all the places that the food that went into that sandwich came from, and get ready for a wonderful deep dive episode with Hallie Casey from the One to Grow On podcast. All right, well, we are back again, and this is, as I mentioned in the intro, the first of our deep dive episodes where we bring a guest back and really drill into some of the stuff that y'all found so interesting and that you've asked for more of. And with everything that's been going on the past several months with lockdowns and obvious issues in our supply chain, I thought one of the perfect people to bring back for our first one is Hallie Casey from way back in episode 5. Hallie, how's it going?
It's going so good. I'm so excited to be back on the show.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And I was listening to some of the old episodes the other day, and I think yours is still one of my very favorites. And so I was just really excited to have you back.
I think I do hold the record for first planthropology guest to say a bad word that you had to come up with a creative bleep for. So I'm pretty proud of that mantle.
It is true. It's true. And it's funny because after, like, since then, I've had a couple of guests that are like trying to figure out how to do it on purpose
Oh, really?
because they think it's funny. Uh, and like, I had one guest, Dr. Jessica Karoom, who was on, and she was like, "Oh, I had like three more I wanted to say." I was like, "Really, Jessica? Really?" Um, but no, it's that was a good first. I thought that was pretty great. So, it's been, I mean, several months since we've talked. Have you been doing okay? How are things in your part of the world right now?
Yeah, things have been good. I am based out of Austin, Texas. So they've been good. I've been working from home, like pretty much everyone else, doing lots and lots of new projects, which has been fun. Gotten really into puzzling.
Oh, there you
So
go.
yeah, no, but it's been good. Work's been really busy, because at my job, I work in supply chain stuff.
Hmm.
So the food supply chain and the food system in general has really been constricted and really felt a lot of pain from being so rigid during this whole pandemic thing. So that's definitely been new and interesting, kind of that craziness at work. But other than that, life's been good.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more. I think at the top of the episode, and I think last time you were on, you were still uh, teaching a little bit, maybe doing some greenhouse stuff and a few other things. But you have since gotten a really cool, in my opinion, a really cool new job. Can you tell us a little bit? You mentioned you're in supply chain, but what specifically do you do?
Yeah, so I work at the Sustainable Food Center in Austin, and I do basically value chain coordination work,
Okay.
and a little bit of technical assistance with buyers and farmers that are interested in selling to wholesale buyers. So Sustainable Food Center as an organization has a long history. It's been around in Austin for more than 20 years in different ways. So, for a long time, it was an organization that did a lot of work around community gardens. We have farmers markets that we run. We've done a lot of work on farm to work, farm to school, food access, education projects. But uh, Last year, the organization kind of did a huge revisioning and really kind of looked at the food landscape of Central Texas and saw, what's happening, what needs to happen, what's missing, and really saw this supply chain, this value chain piece was missing. So it's kind of moving in a direction to try to be more involved, to really make it easier for our schools, our hospitals, our grocery stores to purchase from Texas farmers. So that is kind of the work that I am starting to do. I just started in January and it's now June. So
Okay.
it's been a crazy 6 months of a first gig, or for the first 6 months of a gig, but that's kind of the summary of what I'm doing.
And gosh, what a time to be thrown into something like that,
No
right?
kidding.
Like, you start, and I think when we start any new job, we're like, okay, I've got a little time to like get my feet under me and figure out what I'm doing. And then coronavirus hits,
Right.
what, 2.5 months in, and it's like, oh no, I've got to learn fast. So that's interesting, but it's such an important, I think, place to be working right now. I've I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I said it. I've said this for years, that we're a week, less than a week from empty shelves in a grocery store in the
Yeah.
United States.
Yeah.
And people thought I was crazy saying that for years. When it's like, oh no, that's somewhere else in the world. That's Venezuela. That's whatever else.
Right. And
But
then it happened.
it happened, and it happened fast, and people were totally, I think, totally caught off guard. So, and I don't know how much you can speak to this, but in our traditional food system, right, where we're importing a lot of goods, we're trucking things, warehousing things, all of that. Can you speak possibly to some of the holes in that maybe have been exposed? What broke down? What was why were the shelves so empty?
Yeah, so I guess let's start by kind of defining some of the terms that are being thrown around a lot these days. So the word food system is really encompassing of all of the things that are happening within the the within the agricultural industry, right? So it includes all the producers, it includes processors, it includes buyers, and it includes consumers. So, all the way farm to table, every single person. It even includes like people who are supplying inputs to farms. Um, and ranchers. So that is a really holistic term that's speaking really broadly, and you can kind of narrow down geographically, like the Texas food system. But even like if you talk about the Texas food system, like we import so much food both from around the country and from around the world that it's really hard to kind of limit your scope when talking about food systems. But it's still a really important consideration to really think through all of those connections.
Sure.
And then a food system itself is made up of many supply chains. So supply chain is basically if you would follow one tomato, that tomato is moving along a supply chain.
Mhm.
So all of those different pieces, it's one direct line, basically. It's very linear. Uh, going from, suppliers, farmers, all the way down, but it's just one of those.
Sure.
So if we take an example of one of our supply chains, for example, like maybe we could talk about swine production here
Okay.
in the U.S. So a lot of like, for example, here in Texas, we have HEB, which is our large grocer. HEB gets most of its poultry from one processor. That processor gets all of their swine from several farmers, not a lot of farmers or ranchers, excuse me. And so if a swine processor has a case of coronavirus, then that entire processing plant has to shut down,
Yeah.
which is what we're seeing a lot of because these processing plants are very closely packed. You have a lot of workers that are working long, hard work, lots of breathing. And of course, we've had limited personal protective equipment across the US.
Yeah.
So if you have one processing plant that shuts down, or if you have two farmers that are unable or need to decide to back off their production system, then you just all of the sudden, because it's so dependent on these very few actors, there is nothing to do. So particularly for meat, what we've been seeing is a lot of processors have slowed or stopped production even for short periods of time, and that basically creates this excess of animals that have nowhere to be if not processed,
Right.
because these farms that are so large scale move animals so quickly and so precisely to really maximize the amount of value that they can extract from the process of ranching these pigs, or beef, or whatever it is that we're talking about.
Hmm.
So if you can't take it to slaughter, then there is nowhere to put these animals. Um, and so that's where we really see like disasters happen. And these holes and this kind of lack of resiliency, this real rigidity that we see in the food system, this inability to be flexible and to shift direction is really what we see problematic. Another example is like fruits and vegetables being supplied to restaurants, for
Yeah.
example. So you have like a company that supplies to restaurants, and that's their whole thing, and they do it really well, which is great because it means that they can do it very efficiently. However, when every restaurant shuts down for weeks, then they don't have the ability to be flexible and to pivot that that supply into something like grocery stores. Grocery stores also don't have the ability to take it. Like if the distributor wanted to pivot it into grocery stores, oftentimes grocery stores procurement process is very rigid and requires really specific like documentation and certifications and things like that this distributor might not have. So what we really see is like a lack of just flexibility.
Yeah. And I think some of that, and that's such a good point, and I think some of that flexibility is necessary, or inflexibility, right? Some of that rigidity in the system is necessary to a certain point, because a lot of that, I think, in my opinion, comes, or from what I know, I'll say, comes out of safety regulations, out of things like that, that like we want safety regulations, right? We want our food being um, tested and made sure that it was safe, but then it does cause this bottleneck sometimes. And for me, the thought of during a crisis, food rotting in the field is
Mhm.
like, gosh, that's a heartbreaker.
Right, yeah. A lot of people were really struck by those videos and images of milk being dumped,
Yeah,
when you were seeing grocery stores that were having a hard time keeping milk on the shelves. And yeah, you're right. Like it's really important, especially now, to have really strict food safety guidelines. However, how can we think about building redundancy and resiliency into the system so that the next time something happens, because it's not like this is never going to happen again, even if it's
sure.
not, a pandemic, if there is a natural disaster or, whatever it is, how can we build a system that protects more people and makes it easier for people to get food and makes it easier for farmers and the people along the supply chain to continue to function as a business.
For sure. And like when we talk about, and this is maybe a tangent subject, and we won't spend too much time on it, I don't think, but that it leads my mind into some of the questions and struggles we have with food insecurity
Mhm.
in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is not even considering a worldwide population where it's far worse in some cases. I read a statistic recently, and maybe you can confirm this, that some 30+% of the calories produced are never consumed. Do you think that's correct in terms of food waste and leakage in the supply chain?
Yeah, I think it's between 20 and 30%. Yeah.
Okay. That's a big number.
Yeah.
that's that's a lot of food and a lot of calories. And then when you think about um, the number of people that are malnourished, and when I say malnourished, I don't necessarily just mean that in terms of calories, but in terms of nutrient dense, actual healthy food. And I really enjoyed your episode, and and forgive me, I can't remember her name, but the small farmer, the urban farmer in Chicago, I believe.
Yeah, so we interviewed Sophia Buggs, who
That's
was
it. Yeah,
a urban farmer from Youngstown, Ohio.
I was not even close. That's okay.
I mean, Ohio, Illinois,
They're
up
up there in the
there.
Midwest. But when she talks about that, it's so eye opening, of all the complexity in it, but all the like, gosh, the social justice aspect of food is such a big thing. So I guess leading us into our topic really for today, we've got all these issues, potential, real and potential issues in our global, large scale supply chain. So
Mhm.
something that's been discussed for years, and this is something I did some work in when I was still with Extension, was local and regional food chains and
Mhm.
food webs and all these different things. Can you tell me or tell us a little bit about what does that mean? What does it mean to have a local or regional food system?
Yeah, so that's really the idea of decentralizing these systems. So if all of Texas's pork production goes through 3 processing plants, that's very fragile. It's not really resilient. And it's very centralized, which means that pork can be very cheap, but it also means that it can be very vulnerable. So if we're building out a local or regional food system, we're really thinking through how can we decentralize this system? Maybe we build more smaller meat processing plants. Maybe we, protect farmland so that it's easier for pork ranch or swine ranchers to ranch in Texas so that we can have more localized swine so that we know that we're going to continue to be able to have that supply. Um, these like small steps, it might seem like really small things, and it might be hard to draw that connection, but that is what can build a more resilient system. If we have a more localized system and a more diverse system, a system with more redundancy in it,
Hmm.
if something breaks, then you're less likely to see some kind of disaster or crisis afterwards.
Right, and I guess the idea is that ultimately we don't, in the long run, we don't have to maybe someday see those news stories with an old lady standing at an empty shelf of something, right? Because
Mhm.
either the grocery stores have maybe closer sources to pull from or whatever, or there's other markets. So what's interesting to me, and being, my family, I don't know if we've talked about this, my family owns a small peach orchard. here in Lubbock. So I'm in the local food game to a certain extent.
Mhm.
And when you say local foods to someone, they think, oh, farmer's market,
Right.
right? I think that's number one where people's brains go is, oh, you pack up, you have a little booth, et cetera. But it's really more than that is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's really thinking about how can we shift our grocery system to protect not only like the economic interests of the agricultural industry, broadly speaking, but how can we shift our grocery system to protect our local residents and our local farmers and increase our local economy and protect our environmental, natural resources. It's really like thinking more holistically, what does it mean to be producing food locally and why do we want to be doing it? And really thinking through like how can we purchase better food? How can we make sure our food, was produced with fair labor practices? How can we make sure our food was grown with environmentally sound practices? How can we make sure that our food the money we spend on our food is going back into our communities and supporting our local economies? All of that is related to local food.
Yeah. So there's a huge list of benefits, right? And an interesting conversation that I think surprises people a lot is I use apples as an example a lot because they're an easy example of sometimes how long your apple has been around, right? When you buy it
Yeah.
from the grocery store. Uh, and I can't remember if you talked about this on one of your episodes, but it's such just a fascinating thing to think about that, your apple that you eat from the grocery store may have been around or off the tree for what, 8 months, 10
Yeah.
months in some cases,
Yeah.
warehoused in a climate controlled room full of nitrogen and then chemically ripened.
Yeah.
Eh, And I put ripened sometimes in air quotes because the difference between sometimes a supermarket piece of produce that's come from question mark and something that got to sit on a plant a lot longer is night and day. The quality difference for me is huge.
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely tastes better. And I think that part of when we're talking about like resilient food systems, like we need to be talking about like all of those costs, whether it's an environmental cost on like the diesel it takes to truck something and then store it in a ethylene nitrogen mix, um, or the economic cost that we're not seeing about having these broader sources for our food. Not to say that like everything you grow should come from a 10-mile radius around your house. Like,
Right.
we wouldn't have apples in Texas if that were
Right.
the case.
Right.
Uh, but I don't know, like, thinking through where are the points where we can really support that locally, and I think that peaches are a great example. Texas peaches are incredible.
They're incredible. They're
They're
so
so
good.
good. So good.
And and we enjoyed. It's a challenge up here in the high plains growing peaches a little bit just because of our late winters, but we make it, or our late winters, late freezes, I guess is what I really mean. But we make it work. But the hill country's great. You can grow a lot of peaches there. So I in a second I want to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the roadblocks in getting to this place we're talking about, because I think there are some sizable ones.
Yeah.
Um, but before we get into that, one of them I think is education's a big part of it, like consumer education.
Mhm.
So I'm going to throw a question at you that is a big question that I don't expect you to have a complete answer to, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Um, okay, let's think of it this way. If you we have a local farmers market here, and that I sat on the board for a couple of years, and inevitably in our first market in May, people would come and say, "Well, where are the tomatoes?" Well, they're still in Mexico, right?
Right.
They're not being grown here because our last freeze was a week ago.
Yeah.
So there's this whole concept of seasonality, right? And do you think on okay, so I'm trying to, and I'll edit this out because I'm just rambling a little bit. But I'm trying to think through my question. So there's two sides of this. We can either try to educate the consumer on eating seasonally, um, and maybe thinking about canning and some of those things to get through, or food preservation to get through some of the long periods.
Mhm.
Or we can talk more about sort of a mixed market, that we get the things locally that we can, and still bring our citrus in and still bring our out of season things in. Do you think there is a strategy between those two that's better than the other?
No, I think both are important. And here's why. So I think that a mixed market approach is really key because, like, if we got all of our food from like the counties around Austin and then a tornado blew through, then we would have very little food.
Yeah.
So I think considering geographic specific disaster is really key when you're talking explicitly about like disaster mitigation in building a resilient food chain and food system, sorry, supply chain food system.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of educating the consumer, I think that there's a lot of important work that's being done. I think part of it is incremental, uh, but it's I think that one, this moment is making it much easier to do that work because before this pandemic, a lot of these ideas were really abstract, and it was really hard to make it clear to consumers how fragile the the supply chains actually were. Um, so I think that after having seen that, it's going to make it much easier of a sell both to policymakers and to individual consumers, and also to institutions and other retail markets, to because they felt it on their supply chain. Um, the other part of that second part about education, I think, is that's why it's really key for like the work I'm doing to be reaching out to institutions, to the people, to the organizations that people are with throughout their lives. So like we're working
Okay.
with K through 12, we're working with universities, we're working with healthcare, we're working with restaurants and grocery stores. If it becomes more normalized to have a seasonal menu, I think that that will make it more normal. So outside of just individual behavior change at the household level, I think really talking about cultural shifts and setting priorities at a larger level, whether that's through state, federal, local policy, um, or if it's through setting those priorities at a at on the private side, or I guess schools and universities are public as well, but kind of
Sure.
on that institutional retail side. Um, those organizations have so much space uh, in in consumers is whatever that word is, in their lives, in their everyday lives, right? And so I think that if we can get those players bought into the idea of really values based purchasing and thinking about seasonality and thinking about labor practices, and then talking about them out loud, I think that will make it much easier for consumers to buy into that. Because part of the other thing right now is it's really hard for a consumer to buy into values based purchasing if their option is and farmers market. Here is the one farmers market. Make your Saturday mornings free. You have no other option. Or like getting
Yeah.
a full CSA. If you're one person, what are you going to do with a full CSA where you get
I have a
fully
thousand
sandwiches?
turnips. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Right. Like, so it's hard if those are the access points. Not that direct to consumer marketing is not really important for this work. It is. But I think expanding that work out into these more mainstream outlets can be really a huge game changer for regions.
Absolutely, and we're starting to see it. I think we have a local. Well, they are less local than they used to be, but we have a grocery chain that started up here on the High Plains called United Supermarkets, and they were bought by a larger group recently. But one thing they do that's really cool is they have their traditional kind of market stuff that comes from wherever, and it's tomato, and food labeling is pretty extensive in some cases. So you can look at the label and see where it came from and the lot and all that. But if it's grown in Texas, they actually put a sign up with a picture of the family that grew it and some information about the farm. And I think those are such important interpretive pieces for the consumer, that if we can connect the food we eat with a human being that made it, I think that helps in terms of adoption of, maybe paying a little bit more for local
Mhm.
produce or something. But also, I think that eventually leads to reduce some of these food waste issues. You have more skin in the game, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Like food waste is such a tricky thing to talk about with consumers because like you're right, they're paying like 10 cents for like that piece of carrot or whatever that
Right.
they're throwing away. But yeah, I think that bringing that bringing more transparency to where that food actually comes from, decommodifying it, I think that that can definitely have a huge part in that process.
So we've talked about a couple of them, but are there other major hurdles you see in getting us to this place where we can have this really robust mixed market with a really resilient system?
Listen, friend, it's nothing but hurdles. It's nothing but hurdles. I can talk specifically about like the issues on the farmer side. I can talk a little bit more about like the supply chain issues, but a lot like the core issue is that it's more expensive, right?
Yeah.
That's the core issue. We don't want to make food more expensive. We've been talking about food access throughout this episode, and if you make food more expensive, it's less accessible.
Yep.
However, like now I feel like we have the space to really frame this as a more holistic issue. Like how expensive was the pandemic? I
Right.
mean, like the USDA put out how many millions of dollars in loans?
Yeah.
Like
A lot of millions
a
of dollars.
lot. And it wasn't even loans. It was loans that you didn't have to pay back, which is a grant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's been so expensive to not have that resilient system, that I think it's much easier now, especially on the policy side, to really look at systems like our farm subsidies and think critically about how those can benefit, a more resilient system. Because right now, they don't really do that. Yeah, no, it costs more money. Like, that's so hard. Like, I'm trying to go out and talk to institutions about why it's important to buy from local farmers, and it's 3 times as expensive to buy from local farmers, and
Yeah.
it's a school district with a very limited budget. And of course, now, like, all of those conversations are very different, uh, because they're just trying to, keep staff on, and so that work has really shifted, into thinking more creatively about how we can support farmers through this. But, like, that's just a tough sell, and I think
Yeah.
that that's where we have to look at like policy solutions. Like we really have to speak up, talk to our elected representatives, try to create change at a policy level to really create the change that we want to see within our communities.
And that's such a great point that unfortunate it is what it is, I guess, but so much just comes down to how much does it cost? Oh no, I can't do that. And
Right.
those are real like real limitations. They really are. Like if I can go, and I'm very fortunate in that if I want to go to the farmers market and pay however many dollars for locally grown tomatoes when they're in season, I am fortunate enough and privileged enough to have that information, that ability.
Hmm.
But for so many people, that's just not the case.
Right.
And so no, I totally agree that we have to balance this improving the system while still improving access. And I don't have
Yeah.
the answer
And
to
I mean,
that.
that's the real key. Like we have to think about why are these tomatoes cheaper than those tomatoes? Like, why is it cheaper to buy tomatoes that traveled halfway across the globe
Yeah,
than other kinds of tomatoes? Why is it cheaper to buy this beef that was grown, in a commodity or in a conventional system than to buy, fully grass-fed local beef? Why is that cheaper? Where are those costs being cut? Part of it is economy of scale, for sure. Like, don't
sure.
get me wrong. You
Yeah,
can totally, take advantage of economies of scale, but where are those costs being cut? And it's not that it is actually cheaper when you look at it in total. The price tag is cheaper. What we're seeing shortcuts in environmental regulations. We're seeing shortcuts in labor protections. We're seeing shortcuts in like with just farm subsidies, tax breaks for these large corporations.
yeah,
Those costs are real, even if they're not incorporated into the price that consumers are paying. So even if you're buying something that's a cheap food item, that doesn't mean that it's equal, right? That doesn't mean it's
right.
equivalent. Like if you think about why are we accepting as a society that it's okay for a person who is poor to buy something that was made with slave conditions or similar to slave conditions. Like, why
Yeah.
is that acceptable? Like,
Yeah.
why don't we just look at policy solutions to make good food cheaper?
Hmm.
Like, we can do that. We can protect everyone along the supply chain, and we can vote with our values. Um, but but right now the system's just not set up to do that. Hopefully it will, make hopefully we're going to get there in the end. And I really do think that we will. I feel like I'm bringing a lot of downer energy to this right now.
No, no, no. I don't think so. I think it's so important. And like you've said a couple of times, like, yeah, sometimes if you dwell on it too much, it can be depressing, right? It's just, oh man, like there's so much work to be done. But I think what we're seeing in so many of these social issues right now, and so we're recording at the end of June, and this will come out early August. Who knows what the next month is going to
Yeah.
bring? Who knows what the world looks like today as people listen to this? But you know, we have to talk about these issues. We have to be willing to bear the discomfort sometimes of hearing about and talking about these issues because they're important. They matter. Because they're tied to human beings, and I think I keep coming back to that. There's I think the episode that will have come out just before this. One of the points that guest made is that in science and in things that we do, he's a plant breeder or was a plant breeder. He says our pursuit should be defaulting towards life. And as
Yeah.
we build policy and all those things, it should be to make people's lives better for everyone, right? Like the equity is a big conversation right now, and fixing some of the problems. And again, I feel like I'm soapboxing a little bit, and I don't mean to, but this is something that I'm passionate about for sure.
I mean, we're doing an episode on values-based, like, food
Yes,
systems. I think
right.
that the
Yes.
whole thing is just a little bit of a soapbox. We're
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
fine.
values.
I think people are still listening. It's good. It's good. um, so I guess that leads me into the one of my last questions is like, and we've been discussing it, so maybe it's not even a separate question, but like, where do we go from here? How do we actually start actively in our own lives and in our own spheres of advocacy and influence start pushing forwards to some of these solutions?
I think that's a great question. I think one, you can definitely, like, look at uh, where the economic development money in your region is going, whether it's at the county level or at the state level or whatever it is. I know that's a bit activism-y for folks, but farmland preservation is really key when we're looking at these food systems issues, and that's something that in Texas really needs to be worked on. Like, we have to keep this farmland, otherwise we got nowhere to grow that local food that we need.
Yep, it's important.
But, a little bit more specifically than that, or I guess, a little bit less of a lift than that is, trying to get to know your local food system better. Just getting to know what are the grocery stores in my areas? What are their values? What are their practices? Are they focused on whatever the, best sale is? Are they doing some cool work with local procurement? Is there a way that I can advocate for that? If I really care about this store, what are my local farmers markets? Who are my local farmers? It's a long road. It's not something that everyone's going to be educated on from day one. It's not something that you just go out and you get involved and you're just done.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a long road about really learning. But the good news is the most important work is done on a local level. So really just starting to get involved in the smallest ways in your local food system can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a great take home point that we have the ability and the power to make real change with our purchasing decisions and everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great, like, that gives me a lot of hope for the things that we can do. So just kind of wrapping up, you have recently, I guess at this point on One to Grow On, your podcast, just wrapped up a 4-part series on local foods. Is that correct?
It's a 3-part series. We interviewed
Okay.
an urban farmer that we mentioned earlier, a farmer's market manager, and then we interviewed some folks that were doing work in the good food supply chain. area.
Okay, I keep missing on details about this. um, what? Okay, so I have been listening. I promise, and I promise I pay attention. My brain is just full of dissertation right now, and
Oh my gosh,
it's not working.
I'm so glad I'm not you right now.
People say that a lot. I don't know what that's about. Um,
Oh.
so what? And it may be hard to just narrow one down, but what is your favorite thing that you've learned through that process? Just talking to some of these really cool people, or it can be a couple if you don't want to just narrow one down.
I think one of the like really great takeaways that I had of those interviews and also just from the last couple months is really seeing how many people are really in it for the long haul and like really dedicated to the good work of, protecting all of the people and the planet. Uh, and just hearing their stories about how they find this work and how they get involved and just stay committed to doing that work that is so focused on like really just like your values is so inspiring to me, and it makes it so much easier to get that work done every single day. uh, our interview with Sophia Bugs particularly was really eye-opening for me. I always love interviewing farmers. It's always so much fun. But her experience, she has done a lot of advocacy on the local level as kind of a leader in her area in Youngstown. And she's also a healer. The way that she got into the food system, into farming, her daughter had a condition that needed to be treated, and she was using an herbal medicine to treat this, and it was just so expensive. And she was like, why is this expensive for me to just like heal my child? And she talked about her experience as a mother really getting into farming from an access and from a sovereignty perspective. And hearing her perspective on that just was really, really eye-opening for me, and just, oh my gosh, tugged at my heartstrings. It was really beautiful. But honestly, like all of those like people that we interviewed are just so much smarter than me. So I feel like I will just be re-listening to those interviews forever and always learning more.
Yeah. No, they were really cool. It's really been cool. So, well, is there anything we missed? Is there anything that you came in really wanting to make sure you said that you haven't?
I feel like we got through most of it. I will just say, like, don't worry, there is hope. We're gonna get there in the end. I really do think that. I'm a bit of an optimist, but also like there's a lot of people who really believe in this, and I think that we're gonna get there. So if you left this feeling like despair, I would not dwell on that, friend. I think that we're gonna get there in the end.
Yeah, I totally agree. I 100% agree. And I actually found a lot of this to be very, I mean, educational and hopeful. And I think that our future and our hope is in being better educated about these things. So I think that was definitely hit what I wanted to do with this episode. So tell us again where to find you. Tell us about some of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Hallie_Casey. You can find my podcast at onetogrowonpod.com or at onetogrowonpod on all social media. I guess that's pretty much all I do, isn't it? I was like thinking about, yeah, you can find the work I do at the Sustainable Food Center at sustainablefoodcenter.org. Yeah, please, if you want to talk more about either soil or food systems, my two absolute favorite topics, feel free to reach out.
And I hope you do. And I would strongly encourage you to go listen to One to Grow On. It's one of my favorite shows, and I look forward to it coming out every other week. So,
oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying that.
I really mean it. I really do. And Hallie, again, thank you so much for being on with me. I always enjoy talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been so much fun.
So be encouraged as you listen to this, even though it was maybe a heavier topic than we normally do on this show, that you can make a difference, and that planting a garden and supporting local foods and all of those things will go so far into closing some of these loops and closing some of these holes in our food system. go follow Hallie, go listen to One to Grow On. You will be better for it. Thanks so much for listening. It is because of you that I am able to do these fun things that I can do. Thanks to the Department of Plant and Soil Science here at Texas Tech for the ongoing support and just being so awesome as I go through this, and just for being such a great place to work. Again, follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Search for Planthropology. Look for the green background with the little white tree. You can support the show at patreon.com/planthropology if you're so inclined. And again, thanks for being rad. You guys are super cool. And we'll see you again next week with another wonderful episode of the Planthropology Podcast.